My name is Elara Vance. I am 32 years old, and 3 weeks ago, my parents sent me a text message explicitly ordering me not to attend their lavish anniversary gala because only the uppermost echelon of high society was invited. I honestly thought I was entirely immune to being violently pushed aside. I had endured 10 long years without making a single appearance in the annual family holiday portrait. 10 agonizing years of being awkwardly introduced to their wealthy social circle as the daughter who does something dirty with old bricks. But that specific text message glowing on my phone screen in the middle of a rainy afternoon felt entirely different. It felt absolute. It felt like a door being permanently bolted shut. So, I did exactly what they demanded. I stayed inside my small, quiet apartment that evening, completely alone in the shadows. And then, precisely at 7:52, my cell phone began to violently ring. It was my older sister, Serafina, the exact sibling who absolutely never initiates contact unless she desperately needs to extract something from me. Her voice was violently trembling, bordering on a hysterical shriek. Why on earth did you maliciously hide this from the family? Mom and Dad just saw the international news feeds and they are completely humiliated. I did not hide a single thing, I told her calmly. I simply stopped explaining my existence to people who aggressively refused to open their eyes. Before I guide you through the absolute wreckage of that night, if stories of long overdue justice and breaking the chains of family toxicity resonate within your soul, please take a quiet moment to settle in. If you are listening to my voice from somewhere across the globe, I would love it if you dropped your current location and local time in the comments. I find a strange, beautiful comfort in knowing where my listeners are resting. Now, let me drag you back 3 years to the specific afternoon I accepted a restoration project that would permanently alter the trajectory of my entire life. I grew up inside the Vance household, situated in the most exclusive, gated enclave of a wealthy coastal city. We were a family meticulously designed to look absolutely flawless on heavy cardstock holiday greetings. Generational wealth, legacy country club memberships, and the specific kind of suffocating upper-class anxiety where personal success was strictly measured by which neighbor enviously noticed your brand new imported luxury sedan first. My older sister, Serafina, was the undeniably beautiful one. She was the aggressively social butterfly, the golden daughter who married Preston, a ruthless private equity titan, and quickly moved into a sprawling 8-bedroom neo-colonial estate on the bluffs. My parents absolutely could not stop singing her praises to anyone who would listen. And then, dragging at the bottom of the bloodline, there was me. I willfully chose the path of structural architecture, specifically focusing on historic preservation. It is the exact kind of grueling, unglamorous profession that requires crawling through century-old, spider-infested attics and fiercely battling corrupt real estate developers who desperately want to bulldoze history to build sterile glass condominiums. My mother, Beatrice, once awkwardly introduced me to her elite charity board as the child who does something involving hammers and old timber construction, I believe. My father, Julian, was significantly more direct with his disdain. When you finally decide to abandon this phase and secure a legitimate corporate career, he coldly informed me one Thanksgiving, carving the turkey without looking at me, then we can discuss putting your face back on the family holiday card. Back on. He said it exactly as if I had been purposefully, officially erased from the family archives. The absolute last time I was physically permitted to appear in a formal family photograph was 10 years ago, during Serafina's extravagant destination wedding. I discovered months later that my mother had digitally cropped my entire body out of the version she proudly published to her extensive social circles. The visual composition just flowed significantly better without the distraction on the edge of the frame, she smoothly explained. When I caught her in the lie, I actually still possess that original, unedited photograph buried in a drawer somewhere. In it, I am standing awkwardly at the very far edge of the frame, wearing a deeply discounted, secondhand dress I had managed to find at a vintage consignment shop in the city. Serafina is positioned perfectly in the dead center, practically glowing in custom imported silk. My parents are beaming at her with unadulterated, unfiltered pride. Absolutely no one is looking in my direction. But here is the profound, beautiful secret I absolutely did not comprehend back then. The vital lesson that took me a decade of isolation to fully understand. My total silence during those agonizing years was not a symptom of weakness. It was highly combustible fuel, and it was quietly, methodically building toward a massive explosion that absolutely none of them possessed the imagination to predict. Exactly 3 years ago, I received a secure phone call that permanently shifted the tectonic plates of my career. Blackwood Manor, a sprawling 150-year-old landmark stone mansion located in the absolute heart of the historical district, had been officially scheduled for total demolition. Massive corporate developers aggressively wanted the highly lucrative land it sat upon. The local Historical Preservation Society had completely exhausted their legal funds and surrendered absolutely everyone in the industry assumed the death of the building was a foregone conclusion. But the National Heritage Trust was absolutely not ready to let the ghosts of that estate be silenced. They desperately required a visionary architect who could formulate and present a structural restoration plan compelling enough and flawless enough to legally justify a staggering $12 million state budget. They needed someone who intimately understood that ancient buildings were not merely physical structures made of dead wood and stone. They were breathing, living stories. They called my private office. I spent 3 agonizing, sleepless weeks meticulously preparing my defense proposal. I ruthlessly hunted down every single original architectural blueprint, translated decades of handwritten renovation records, and scoured newspaper archives dating back to the late 1800s. When I finally stood up and presented my vision to the grin-faced board of directors, I did not just show them what Blackwood Manor could magically become. I vividly showed them what the estate had always been and exactly why its heartbeat still mattered to the cultural soul of the city. Eleanor Sterling, the legendary executive director of the National Heritage Trust, personally signed my project approval letter with her own pen. I still have that specific email permanently saved in a digital folder quietly labeled evidence. Not because I thought I would ever need physical proof of my worth, but because I desperately wanted to remember the exact moment someone wielding massive power looked at my brain and believed in me. For 18 grueling months, I physically lived and breathed the restoration of that manor. I personally hand-selected every single piece of replacement timber. I aggressively tracked down obscure, elderly artisans who still possessed the lost knowledge of restoring Victorian-era plasterwork. I spent 3 entire months obsessing over the grand front entrance doors alone. They were 2 massive, towering panels of quarter-sawn oak that had been tragically rotting under layers of cheap paint for decades. My parents never knew a single detail about my life. I operated the contract strictly under the legal name of my architectural firm, never utilizing my own name in the press. I despise public attention. And honestly, I had completely stopped trying to impress people who had already decided they never planned to be impressed by me. But I absolutely did not know then that my parents, out of all the thousands of elite venues available in our state, would arrogantly choose the newly restored Blackwood Manor to host their lavish 35th anniversary gala. The exact building my hands had saved. The exact oak doors I had painstakingly restored. The cultural legacy I had bled to protect. It is incredibly funny how the universe quietly arranges its dark ironies. Let me tell you about what occurred last winter. I was not formally invited to the family holiday gathering, naturally, but I stubbornly showed up anyway. I drove 2 hours through blinding, freezing sleet because some small, pathetic, broken part of my inner child still desperately believed that maybe, just maybe, this specific time would magically be different. My mother opened the heavy Front door wearing an immaculate cream cashmere sweater and obscenely expensive. Silk scarf draped perfectly around her throat. Her warm, hosting smile violently flickered and died for exactly 1 second when she recognized my face in the cold. "Oh, Elara. We absolutely were not expecting you to make the drive tonight." "I brought a gift," I said quietly, holding up a carefully wrapped package. It was a pristine, first edition volume on European cathedral architecture. I had aggressively hunted it down at a rare estate sale and spent significantly more capital on it than my budget allowed. She took the heavy package from my hands, without even glancing down at the expensive wrapping paper. "How surprisingly thoughtful of you. I will just place it over here with the others." Inside the roaring warmth of the living room, Serafina was loudly holding court by the massive stone fireplace, aggressively showing off glowing photographs of her latest high society philanthropy gala on her phone screen. My father was locked in a deep, hushed conversation with an older gentleman I instantly recognized from local political news broadcasts. It was Judge Montgomery, a powerful federal appointee and apparently a highly prized new addition to my parents' elite social circle. When my father finally noticed me standing awkwardly in the room, he did not say hello. He did not offer a hug. He simply offered one sharp, dismissive nod of his chin and instantly turned his back on me to resume his networking. "As I was just saying, Judge," my father boasted smoothly, "our brilliant daughter Serafina has been executing truly wonderful, groundbreaking work with the Children's Hospital Board this quarter." Our daughter. Singular. I stood completely frozen in that suffocating living room for 45 minutes. Not a single biological relative spoke to me directly. When my mother was forced to awkwardly introduce me to a wealthy woman from her country club, she offered a tight smile and said, "This is Elara. She does renovations, hammers, nails, and dirty things of that nature." The wealthy woman's smile was impeccably polite and utterly dismissive. "Oh, how incredibly interesting for you," she murmured, instantly looking away. I quietly slipped out the front door long before dessert was served. On my way out through the grand foyer, I passed the ornate hallway table where my thoughtful gift had been unceremoniously dumped. It was still perfectly wrapped in its paper. Resting stuck to the top of the box was a bright yellow sticky note containing my mother's elegant handwriting. The note simply read, "Regift to the local charity drive." That was the exact freezing night I made myself an unbreakable, ironclad promise. I would never, ever again willingly walk into a room where my existence was not wanted. Exactly 3 weeks before my parents' massive anniversary gala, I was sitting alone in my quiet apartment when my cell phone aggressively buzzed on the desk. It was a notification from a sprawling, extended family group chat that I had been silently, manually removed from 2 years prior. The Vance family. They had deliberately added my phone number back into the chat specifically to deliver one single message. "Elara, please do not attempt to attend the anniversary party. Only the highest echelon of society guests will be in attendance. We absolutely do not want to be forced to awkwardly explain your situation to them. Mom and Dad." I sat there and read the glowing text message 3 entire times. Not because my brain failed to comprehend the English language, but because I needed to make absolutely certain my eyes weren't hallucinating the cruelty. "Your situation." They phrased it exactly as if I were a highly contagious disease, a shameful, embarrassing problem that needed to be locked in a basement and managed. I did not type a single character in reply. Some venomous messages simply do not deserve the dignity of a response. But here is exactly what my arrogant parents did not know. That exact same afternoon, a vastly different envelope had been securely delivered to my physical mailbox. It was constructed of heavy, expensive cream cardstock, featuring the official, gold-embossed seal of the National Architectural Preservation Society. I carefully sliced it open with trembling hands. "Dear Ms. Vance, on behalf of the Pinnacle Laurel Selection Committee, we are Profoundly pleased to officially inform you that you have been unanimously nominated for the upcoming Pinnacle Laurel in the Emerging Visionary category. Your flawless, revolutionary restoration work on Blackwood Manor has been formally cited by the Global Committee as a defining, generational example of preservation excellence. The Pinnacle Laurel. It was the architectural industry's absolute highest, most coveted honor. It was the exact same rare medal awarded to the most legendary, historic titans of my profession. And resting at the very bottom of the heavy letter was one single, powerful signature. Eleanor Sterling, Executive Director, National Heritage Trust. The exact same Eleanor Sterling that my ambitious parents, I would later discover, had desperately, personally invited to their anniversary gala. The highly influential woman my mother desperately wanted to impress to secure a seat on her elite charity board. My personal mentor. I slowly set the heavy, gold-embossed letter down on my desk, directly next to my glowing phone. The vicious text message from my mother illuminated the screen. Right beside it, two incredibly powerful messages. One explicitly telling me I was worthless garbage. One officially declaring to the world that I was exceptional. Both pieces of reality arriving on the exact same day. Exactly 1 week before the grand party, my sister Serafina called my phone. This was a highly unusual, suspicious event. My sister absolutely never initiates contact unless she desperately desires something confidential. Information, desperate validation, or a convenient scapegoat to blame for her own failures. I answered the call anyway, because the ancient, toxic habits of childhood are incredibly difficult to break. Elara, how are you doing? Her voice dripped with honey-sweet poison, utilizing the exact, artificial tone she deploys when she knows she is performing for an audience. I am perfectly fine, Serafina. What exactly do you need? A very small, calculated pause on the line. I just really wanted you to know that I aggressively tried to convince Mom and Dad to invite you to the gala. I really, truly did fight for you. But you know exactly how Mom gets about her social appearances. I said absolutely nothing. I just let the silence hang heavily in the air. Honestly, she continued smoothly, it is probably entirely for the best. You would be so incredibly uncomfortable around those types of elite people anyway. Judge Montgomery will be there, the elite banking families, several senior executives from Dad's corporate firm. It is just not really your scene, you know? My scene. You know exactly what I mean. All that tedious, high-level small talk about offshore investments and European vacations. You would be completely bored out of your mind. She let out a light, tinkling laugh. I am honestly doing you a massive favor by keeping you away. Really? I murmured. I almost genuinely believed her performance. That is the truly terrifying thing about Serafina. She has been aggressively gaslighting people for so many decades that her own brain is utterly convinced her cruelty is actually an act of deep kindness. So, she continued, shifting gears to the true, insidious reason for the phone call. What exactly have you been up to lately? Anything remotely exciting? She was desperately fishing. She was hunting for pathetic scraps of information she could loudly share at the party, likely to prove to the guests that she benevolently still kept in touch with her troubled, estranged sister. Nothing much, I replied evenly. Just normal work. Still doing the old building thing. Still doing the old building thing. Well, I could physically hear the profound disappointment deflating her voice. Absolutely no juicy gossip to harvest for the cocktail hour. Just take good care of yourself, okay? And please do not take the party exclusion personally. It is really, truly not about you. But it was absolutely about me. It had always exclusively been about me. Specifically, about ensuring that I remained permanently invisible in the dirt. I discovered much later through an aunt that Serafina had absolutely never advocated for my invitation. She was actually the specific person who had maliciously suggested to our mother she is always so incredibly awkward and poorly dressed at these high society events. It will be infinitely easier and significantly less embarrassing for everyone's reputation if she just stays home. My father called my phone exactly 3 days later. This was a significantly more alarming event than Serafina's call. Julian Vance absolutely does not make casual phone calls. He issues aggressive, corporate summons. The pure fact that he was reaching out to me directly meant he desperately wanted to ensure the toxic message was explicitly clear. Elara, his voice was the exact same cold, sterile tone he had utilized my entire childhood. Clipped, highly efficient, sounding exactly like a man ruthlessly closing a hostile corporate merger. I understand you successfully received the written message regarding the anniversary gala. I did. Good. Your mother and I have firmly discussed the logistics. The VIP guest list is entirely finalized and closed. I sat quietly, waiting for him to offer something else. A weak explanation. Perhaps even a transparent, thin justification for the rejection. Instead, he forged ahead. Judge Montgomery will be attending. Several senior managing partners from my old firm. Extremely important people. I understand, Dad. Do you? He let out a heavy sigh, and I clearly heard decades of profound, bitter disappointment exhaling in that single sound. If you had simply made significantly different, intelligent career choices, we absolutely would not be having this uncomfortable conversation right now. I have always maintained that a woman possessing your natural intelligence could have done absolutely anything in this world. Corporate law, specialized medicine, high-level finance. Instead, you willfully chose to play in the dirt with old, rotting buildings. Play. He spoke the word as if my grueling 18-month, multi-million-dollar structural restoration of a state landmark was equivalent to building a child's treehouse in the backyard. The guest list is final. I repeated his words back to him. You already stated that. I am incredibly glad we perfectly understand each other. He was just about to terminate the call when he added, almost as a careless afterthought, some powerful woman from the National Heritage Trust is attending. Eleanor something or other. Your mother desperately wants to secure a highly coveted seat on our charity board, so it is absolutely critical that everything goes flawlessly. Absolutely no dramatic distractions. Eleanor Sterling, the exact woman who had personally mentored me through the most grueling, important architectural project of my entire career. The exact woman whose powerful signature was proudly resting at the bottom of my pinnacle laurel nomination letter. My arrogant father was desperately hoping to impress my own personal mentor at a lavish party held inside the very building I had physically restored with my own hands, all while aggressively keeping me hidden away in the dark like a shameful family secret. Absolutely no distractions, I agreed smoothly. Understood perfectly. I hung up the phone before he could hear the dark, victorious laughter bubbling up in my throat. Exactly 2 days prior to the Grand Gala, I received a text message from Aunt Cordelia, my father's younger sister. She was a deeply bitter woman I saw, perhaps once a year at mandatory, suffocating family gatherings. Elara, honey, your poor mother tearfully told me all about the party situation. I just wanted to reach out and check in on your mind. She mentioned you have been severely struggling with some dark mental health issues lately. Is everything okay in your head? I sat and stared at the glowing screen for a very long time. Mental health issues. My mother hadn't merely excluded me from the prestigious guest list. She had actively, maliciously fabricated an elaborate cover story. A convenient, tragic reason for my sudden absence that instantly made her look like a deeply compassionate, long-suffering saint and made me look entirely broken and unstable. I immediately logged onto my social media accounts. I absolutely knew I shouldn't have, but I couldn't stop myself. There it was, buried deep in the public comments section of a post from one of my mother's wealthy country club friends. Beatrice, I am so incredibly sorry to hear the tragic news about your younger daughter. Severe mental illness is such a devastating burden on families. You're handling the trauma with such incredible, inspiring grace. My mother had publicly liked the comment. I scrolled further down the page, my blood turning to ice, and found another. Sending my deepest prayers for poor Elara. Beatrice has been so incredibly strong through all of this darkness. And then I saw my mother's public reply. Thank you so much, Susan. We are doing our absolute best to manage the situation. Some fragile children simply struggle to survive in the real world. I slowly looked around my quiet apartment. I looked at the heavy-framed architectural preservation awards hanging proudly on my walls. I looked at the towering stacks of elite trade magazines featuring my complex projects in glossy, multi-page spreads. I looked at the official, gold-embossed email from the Preservation Society sitting open on my laptop screen. I was sitting inside the private office of a woman who had just been unanimously nominated for the absolute highest, most prestigious honor in her entire global profession. And my own biological mother was actively, publicly telling the elite members of her city that I was entirely incapable of functioning in society. Here is the fundamental truth about vicious lies. They require constant, exhausting maintenance. They need to be aggressively fed, watered, and endlessly repeated until absolutely everyone in the room forgets that they originated as pure fiction. My mother had methodically constructed an entire, elaborate mythology surrounding her deeply troubled, tragic second daughter. And she had been carefully cultivating that poisonous garden for years. But mythologies inherently possess one fatal weakness. They catastrophically collapse into dust the exact moment undeniable reality walks through the front door. The very night before the grand party, I picked up the phone and called Eleanor Sterling, not to pathetically complain about my family. I have never been particularly good at seeking pity. I called to officially confirm the precise timeline for the award announcement. I knew the global nomination was scheduled to be made public imminently. I just didn't know the exact hour. Elara. Eleanor's voice was incredibly warm, exuding the exact quiet power she always carried. I was genuinely hoping you would call me today. The International Committee has fully finalized absolutely everything. The global announcement goes live tomorrow evening. Tomorrow. The exact same day as my parents' lavish anniversary party. That is absolutely wonderful news, I said. And I meant every single syllable. There is something else, Eleanor continued. And I could clearly hear the bright smile radiating in her voice. The National Heritage Trust Board has officially approved a massive, brand new state grant. $750,000 dedicated entirely to the structural restoration of the historic state capitol rotunda. And the board unanimously wants you to lead the entire project as the principal architect. I had to physically sit down hard on my kitchen chair. Eleanor, I honestly do not even know what to say. Say yes. You have bled for this, and you have earned it. She paused, her tone shifting slightly. Will your family be joyously celebrating this monumental achievement with you tomorrow night? I imagine they must be bursting with incredible pride. The heavy silence stretched over the phone line a beat too long. They actually have other prior plans, I said, finally, keeping my voice neutral. Something profound immediately shifted in her tone. It was absolutely not pity. It was deep, razor-sharp understanding. Actually, speaking of evening plans, I will be attending a formal gala tomorrow night myself. Some lavish corporate event being hosted at Blackwood Manor. I am quite looking forward to physically seeing the bones of the building again. My heart completely stopped beating in my chest. An anniversary party? I asked softly, though I already intimately knew the answer. Yes, I firmly believe so. The Vance family, if I am not mistaken. Do you happen to know them? I nearly laughed out loud at the absurdity of the universe. You could definitely say that. What a truly incredibly small world we live in, Eleanor said cheerfully. Well, if you suddenly find yourself free tomorrow evening, you absolutely know exactly where to find me. I would profoundly love to raise a glass and toast your massive nomination in person. I thanked her profusely and hung up the phone. Eleanor Sterling would be standing inside my parents' party, entirely surrounded by wealthy elites who had been explicitly told that I was severely mentally ill and locked away, and the global announcement that would completely, permanently prove them all wrong was officially scheduled to go live on the internet at exactly 7:30 p.m. Let me pause the narrative right here for a brief moment. If you have ever been treated by your own biological family as if your existence was a humiliating burden, but you are miraculously still standing, still aggressively building your empire, still relentlessly moving forward into the light, I truly, deeply see you. Please type "still standing" in the comments below. And if you desperately want to know exactly what explosive chaos occurred when the absolute truth finally shattered the illusions at that party, make sure you are actively subscribed. You absolutely do not want to miss the carnage that comes next. Now, let us dive back into the story. The morning of the massive gala, I woke up entirely alone in my quiet apartment. The early morning sunlight filtered through the large glass windows at that specific, golden angle that makes absolutely everything look slightly softer and more beautiful than it actually is. I meticulously brewed my coffee the exact way I always do, dark roast in a French press, absolutely no sugar, and sat at my small kitchen table, completely surrounded by the tangible objects that made this safe space entirely mine. Heavy, leather-bound architecture volumes stacked on every available surface. Freshly dried lavender resting in a glass jar on the windowsill. A beautiful, framed, original blueprint of Blackwood Manor hanging proudly directly above my desk. My apartment is quite small, perhaps 800 square feet. Absolutely nothing impressive or grand by my parents' exorbitant, greedy standards. But absolutely everything inside these walls I had specifically chosen. Absolutely everything inside these walls I had bled to earn. I confidently opened my laptop to review some complex project notes, fiercely determined to treat this day exactly like any other normal Thursday. But then, the social media algorithm viciously betrayed me. Serafina's glowing, curated story abruptly appeared at the very top of my digital feed. It was a highly stylized, filtered video of her sitting in the luxurious back seat of a hired black town car, an expensive crystal champagne flute clutched in her hand, getting her hair meticulously touched up by a professional stylist at a salon that undoubtedly charged more per hour than my monthly utility bills. The arrogant caption read, "Getting perfectly glammed up for the biggest night of the year." I kept scrolling. I absolutely knew I shouldn't have done it, but human nature is a tragic flaw. Another glowing story appeared. The stunning, historic front stone facade of Blackwood Manor, lavishly decorated with thousands of imported white flowers and twinkling, expensive fairy lights for the evening festivities. She had casually filmed it from the tinted window of the luxury car as they pulled up the long gravel driveway for the early event setup. And right there, sitting proudly in the corner of the digital frame, I clearly saw them. The towering, majestic oak front doors. My doors. The exact same doors I had spent 3 agonizing, exhausting months painstakingly restoring by hand. I had aggressively sourced the heavy, replacement brass hardware from a specialized, obscure antique shop hidden deep in the mountains. I had meticulously hand-sanded every single intricate wooden panel until the ancient grain emerged, looking exactly as if it had been patiently waiting for an entire century just to finally be seen by the world again. Serafina had absolutely no idea. None of them had a single, microscopic clue. They were eagerly preparing to throw the most lavish party of the decade inside a massive, historic building entirely covered in my invisible fingerprints, and they had arrogantly told me I wasn't good enough to walk through the front door. I calmly closed the social media application and went back to drinking my black coffee. I absolutely did not directly witness what occurred next, but I heard the vivid, explosive details later from Eleanor, from a deeply ashamed Aunt Cordelia, and from the fractured pieces my terrified family accidentally let slip in the Chaotic aftermath. So, let me paint the picture of exactly what I meticulously pieced together. The grand anniversary gala officially commenced at exactly 6 o'clock in the evening. 150 of the city's most elite, powerful guests arrived in a seemingly endless, glittering procession of imported German luxury sedans and hired town cars. It was a strict, black tie affair. The wealthy women were draped in designer gowns that cost more than my very first vehicle. The powerful men wore bespoke, custom-tailored tuxedos. A professional string quartet softly played classical music in the corner, while hired servers wearing pristine white gloves flawlessly circulated the room carrying heavy silver trays loaded with champagne. It was an extremely rare, exclusive vintage according to Serafina's boastful social media updates, running approximately $300 per bottle. My mother, Beatrice, stood regally at the grand entrance wearing a stunning, deep burgundy designer gown, massive heirloom diamonds dripping from her ears. She enthusiastically greeted every single arriving guest exactly as if she were proudly hosting a royal coronation. My father, Julian, aggressively worked the massive room with the frantic, calculated energy of a desperate man who had been obsessively rehearsing his corporate small talk in the mirror for weeks. The venue is absolutely, breathtakingly spectacular, Beatrice, one wealthy guest, reportedly gushed as she slowly walked through the meticulously restored grand foyer, admiring the soaring ceiling. Who exactly handled the architectural renovation? My mother casually waved her hand in the air, completely dismissing the question. Oh, some obscure, faceless construction firm or another. The hired event coordinator exclusively handled all those tedious, boring details. But isn't it absolutely perfect? I simply knew in my bones this was the exact right place the moment I laid eyes on it. Perfect. A magnificent, historic building she had never once bothered to research. A grueling, multi-million-dollar restoration project she possessed absolutely no idea was mine. Serafina effortlessly floated through the dense crowd draped in custom silk, her wealthy, passive husband Preston obediently trailing behind her exactly like a well-dressed, silent accessory. She aggressively posed for professional photographs beside the massive, carved marble fireplace. She posed beneath the glittering, fully restored crystal chandelier. She posed directly against the intricate, hand-painted historical wallpaper that I had viciously fought the developers to preserve when absolutely everyone else in the room desperately wanted to tear it out and destroy it. The towering floral centerpieces resting on every single table consisted of imported white hydrangeas nestled in heavy crystal vases. Mom's elegant taste is utterly impeccable, Serafina captioned her latest glowing social media story. And somewhere, quietly sitting across town, I sat alone in my small, unassuming apartment, watching their entire illusion unfold on a glowing 6-inch screen. Eleanor Sterling arrived at exactly 7 o'clock. She entered the building entirely without loud fanfare, without a hovering entourage, and without a dramatic announcement. But the entire massive room instantly noticed her presence anyway. Eleanor possesses that incredibly rare, magnetic quality. She absolutely does not need to loudly demand attention. She simply carries ultimate authority with her. Understated, profound elegance. She wore a simple, flawless navy dress and understated pearls. It was the exact kind of quiet, terrifying presence that exclusively comes from decades of knowing you are the absolute most knowledgeable, powerful person in whatever building you choose to stand in. My mother spotted her face immediately in the crowd. Mrs. Sterling, Beatrice, aggressively crossed the grand foyer with her crystal champagne glass raised high into the air, her artificial smile stretched wide enough to effortlessly accommodate all her desperate, climbing ambitions. What an absolute, profound honor to have you attend our celebration tonight. I have heard so many incredible, inspiring things about the National Heritage Trust's charity work. It is truly deeply inspiring. Eleanor calmly accepted the effusive greeting with impeccable, polite neutrality. Thank you very much for the invitation. I must say I possess a deeply personal connection to this specific estate. It is truly lovely to see it, breathing and in use again. My mother's eyes instantly lit up with predatory excitement. It was the perfect opening for social connection, for aggressive networking, for securing whatever elite board position she had been ruthlessly angling toward for months. Oh, how incredibly wonderful. Did you frequently attend high society events here before the massive renovation occurred? Or perhaps after? Actually, Eleanor slowly glanced around the massive room, her sharp gaze lingering knowingly on the restored crown molding, the original, gleaming hardwood floors, and the towering glass windows I had fiercely fought to preserve. I was quite heavily involved with the entire restoration project. I worked incredibly closely with the brilliant lead architect. My mother vigorously nodded her head along, clearly absolutely not listening to a single word, her brain already rapidly calculating her next manipulative social move. Speaking of which, Eleanor continued seamlessly, her tone conversational. I was genuinely hoping to see Elara here tonight. Is she perhaps running a bit late? My mother's perfectly painted smile instantly froze solid for exactly 1 second. Just 1 microscopic second. The flawless mask violently slipped. Elara. She recovered her composure terrifyingly quickly, rapidly rearranging her facial expression into something closely approaching deep, maternal concern. Oh, I am so deeply sorry, but she unfortunately couldn't make it tonight. She is absolutely not well, I am afraid. You know exactly how those tragic things are. Eleanor's sharp eyes narrowed very slightly. That is incredibly strange. I actually spoke with her on the phone just yesterday afternoon. She sounded perfectly, completely fine to me. My mother had absolutely no viable, practiced response prepared for that statement. The very first massive crack had appeared in the foundation. At exactly 7:30 p.m., the National Architectural Preservation Society officially published their global announcement. The Pinnacle Laurel nominations simultaneously appeared on their main website, across all their massive social media accounts, and in a detailed press release sent directly to every single major architecture publication in the country. Within mere minutes, the Heritage Design Quarterly proudly shared their pre-written, massive feature article. It was 12 glossy pages of high-resolution photographs and deep interviews, months in the meticulous making, timed absolutely perfectly to coincide with the announcement. The bold, massive headline read, "Elara Vance, the visionary woman, reshaping America's architectural heritage." I was still sitting quietly in my apartment when I watched the article officially go live. I nervously refreshed the webpage 3 entire times just to make absolutely certain it was real. My professional photograph, my grueling, exhausting work, my name, all of it thrust out into the light of the world for absolutely anyone to find, including every single wealthy guest currently standing inside my parents' party. The total collapse officially began with a local journalist. She was a prominent woman who aggressively covered arts and culture for the city's major newspaper, and she had been invited to the gala as a friend of a friend. Her cell phone violently buzzed with an urgent news alert. She casually glanced down at the glowing screen and then physically did a massive double take. "Did you just see this breaking news?" she whispered urgently to the wealthy man standing beside her. The brilliant architect who fully restored this specific building just got nominated for the Pinnacle Laurel. The man leaned over to inspect the screen. "Blackwood Manor? This exact building we are standing in?" "The very one." She rapidly scrolled through the glowing article. "Elara Vance. She is only 32 years old. The critics are already hailing her as one of the most vitally important preservation architects of her entire generation." The name began to rapidly circulate through the ballroom. It was whispered in hushed tones at first and then spoken loudly aloud. Wealthy guests frantically pulled Out their cell phones. The Heritage Design quarterly article rapidly loaded on. Screen after glowing screen. And buried deep within that sprawling article, there was a specific photograph. A picture of me proudly standing directly in front of Blackwood Manor's fully restored, majestic entrance, smiling in a deeply genuine way I had almost completely forgotten I was capable of. One confused guest turned to another. Wait a minute. Vance? Isn't that the exact last name of the hosts throwing this party? The heavy question hung suspended in the air like a lit stick of dynamite. My mother is terrifyingly good at aggressively managing social narratives. She has had decades of intense practice meticulously curating her public image, ruthlessly controlling exactly what people are permitted to see and burying the ugly things they shouldn't. But she was entirely physically incapable of managing this explosion. Elara Vance, a wealthy woman draped in heavy emeralds, aggressively approached my mother with her glowing phone extended. Beatrice, is this woman your daughter? My mother casually glanced down at the screen. She saw my smiling face. She read the massive headline, and her facial expression violently cycled through pure shock, rapid recognition, and then something dangerously close to absolute blinding panic, all within the span of a single heartbeat. Oh no, that must surely be a completely different Vance family. She laughed, but the sound came out entirely wrong. It was far too high-pitched, far too fast, laced with sheer terror. Our Elara simply works in basic, dirty construction, I believe. Absolutely not high-level architecture. But the detailed article explicitly mentions she grew up in the exact same affluent neighborhood as you. The woman pressed harder, refusing to let it go. And she possesses the exact same last name. It is a highly common name. My mother frantically waved her hand dismissively in the air. I am absolutely certain it is just a bizarre, funny coincidence. But another curious guest had already rapidly Googled my name on their phone. It clearly says right here that she grew up on the bluffs of Sterling Bay. Isn't that exactly where your primary estate is located? My father suddenly materialized at my mother's side, drawn over by the escalating commotion. What exactly is going on over here? He demanded. They are actively saying the brilliant architect who fully restored this estate is someone named Elara Vance. My father's face instantly went carefully, terrifyingly blank. It was his absolute signature boardroom expression. The exact stone face he utilized right before massive corporate deals went sideways. I am absolutely certain there has been some kind of massive clerical mistake. But there was absolutely no mistake. The Heritage Design quarterly feature was incredibly thorough. It explicitly detailed my elite education, my grueling early projects, and most damningly of all, it proudly included a direct, devastating quote from me regarding my childhood. I learned incredibly early in life that my physical work would have to speak significantly louder than my words, the quote read. Inside my own family structure, I absolutely never felt like my voice was heard or valued. So, I ultimately decided to let the historic buildings do the screaming for me. Someone actually read that specific, damning quote out loud to the group. The entire room went dead, suffocatingly quiet. And my mother, perhaps for the very first time in her entire manipulative life, had absolutely nothing to say in her defense. My cell phone violently rang at exactly 7:52 p.m. I was still sitting quietly at my small kitchen table, still inside my safe apartment, still entirely alone. The massive architectural announcement had been live for exactly 22 minutes. I intimately knew exactly what was coming before I even bothered to look at the caller ID on the screen. Serafina. I calmly answered the call. Why the hell did you maliciously hide this from the family? Her voice was violently shaking. It was absolutely not trembling with sisterly concern, but with raw, unadulterated fury barely contained beneath the surface. Mom and Dad just saw the international news feeds, and they are completely, utterly blindsided. Do you possess even the slightest idea of how incredibly embarrassing this is for us? Hello to you, too, Serafina. Do not you dare be sarcastic with me right now. Absolutely everyone at this party is aggressively asking questions about you. Everyone. Judge Montgomery's nosy wife just cornered Mom demanding to know exactly why you aren't here celebrating. Mrs. Sterling, that powerful woman from the National Trust, keeps bringing your name up to everyone. This was supposed to be Mom and Dad's magical, perfect night. And you deliberately, maliciously made it all about yourself. I sat back and simply let her furious, panicked words wash over me like a warm wave. In the background of the call, I could clearly hear the chaotic sounds of the party. The music playing, crystal glasses clinking, and my mother's shrill voice rising in forced, desperate brightness. Yes, of course we intimately knew about the award. We just fiercely wanted to keep it a private, humble family matter. I absolutely didn't make a single thing about myself, Serafina, I replied quietly. I just existed in the world. I worked incredibly hard. I massively succeeded. And absolutely none of you ever bothered to ask me a single question about my life. You maliciously did this on purpose. Serafina's flawless, aristocratic composure completely shattered. You waited until tonight to humiliate us. The International Architectural Committee strictly decides exactly when global announcements go out, Serafina, not me. You absolutely should have warned us. You should have told us. I almost let out a genuine, dark laugh. Warned you. About what, exactly? That I am incredibly brilliant at my job? You have had 10 entire years to ask me one single, genuine question about my career trajectory. You never, ever did. Dead, heavy silence on the line. Then, muffled through the speaker, I clearly heard my mother sobbing in the background. We had absolutely no idea. She absolutely never tells us anything about her life. I have to go, Serafina. Snapped and aggressively hung up the phone. I slowly set down my cell phone and let the beautiful, heavy silence settle around my shoulders. For the very first time in my 32 years of existence, I absolutely did not feel an ounce of guilt for simply existing. Back at the lavish gala, the entire illusion was violently unraveling at the seams. The elite guests had completely stopped admiring the expensive floral decor and had started intensely, suspiciously watching my family. It was incredibly subtle at first. Knowing glances silently exchanged, raised, judgmental eyebrows. But by 8 o'clock, the atmospheric shift was undeniably unmistakable. My parents' grand, flawless anniversary celebration had rapidly mutated into something else entirely. It was a slow-motion public execution. Judge Montgomery, an incredibly powerful man my father had been desperately trying to cultivate a lucrative relationship with for months, walked directly up to him, his expensive champagne flute still firmly in hand. Julian, he said, his voice carrying clearly, your own flesh and blood daughter designed and restored this magnificent building, and you didn't even bother to mention it to me? My father's heavy jaw tightened visibly. It is an incredibly complicated situation. Your Honor, private family matters. Complicated? The judge's freezing tone heavily suggested he did not find that pathetic explanation remotely satisfying. You aggressively boasted to me earlier this evening about how incredibly proud you were of your successful family. It seems you conveniently left out a rather significant, world-class accomplishment. Across the sprawling room, Serafina stood rigidly by the mahogany bar, desperately attempting to maintain her flawless composure while furiously scrolling through her phone screen. Her wealthy husband, Preston, hovered nervously nearby, his facial expression completely unreadable. I would learn much later that he had quietly pulled up the architectural feature article himself and meticulously read every single word. My mother, meanwhile, was frantically attempting to do exactly what she had always done best: violently wrestle control of the collapsing narrative. Of course we are incredibly, fiercely proud of Elara, she lied smoothly to a cluster of highly curious, elite guests, her painted smile stretched dangerously thin. We have always unconditionally supported her artistic dreams. We just genuinely didn't want to overshadow the anniversary party with her massive news. You surely understand? But Aunt Cordelia was standing right there. Aunt Cordelia, who had sent me that vicious text message interrogating me about my supposed mental health issues. Just 2 days prior. Beatrice, she said slowly, her voice cutting through the chatter. You explicitly, tearfully told me that Elara was severely struggling. That she completely couldn't function in reality. That was the exact reason you gave me for why she wasn't invited tonight. The surrounding guests all slowly turned to stare at my mother. That is absolutely not exactly my mother. Started to stammer. And that massive global article states that she single-handedly led a $12 million restoration project, and Cordelia continued relentlessly. The exact building we are currently standing inside. Right now, my mother's crystal champagne glass visibly trembled in her hand. The heavy, expensive crystal violently caught the light radiating from the restored chandelier above them. The exact same massive chandelier I had viciously fought the developers to painstakingly restore instead of lazily replacing it with modern garbage. Absolutely no rehearsed, manipulative script could possibly save her now. Eleanor Sterling had been quietly, astutely watching the entire meltdown from across the room. She did not raise her voice to command attention. She absolutely didn't have to. Eleanor simply took a step toward the dead center of the grand foyer, gracefully set her champagne glass down onto a passing server's silver tray and patiently waited. The chaotic conversations instantly quieted down. Hundreds of eyes turned toward her in reverence. When you have spent 40 ruthless years commanding corporate boardrooms and global preservation committees, you inherently learn exactly how to hold an entire room hostage without demanding a single thing. I sincerely hope you will all indulge me for just a brief moment, she announced, her powerful voice carrying with effortless, terrifying clarity. I would very much like to say a few words about the history of this spectacular estate and about the truly remarkable, brilliant woman who single-handedly saved it from the wrecking ball. My mother's face went completely ashen pale. Exactly 3 years ago, Eleanor continued, Blackwood Manor was officially scheduled for total demolition. The greedy corporate developers had won the legal battle. The local historical society had completely surrendered. I attended the final, depressing board meeting fully expecting to cast my vote for closure. She paused, letting the heavy weight of that historical moment settle over the crowd. Then a very young, fiercely determined architect confidently walked into the room carrying a massive proposal. It was not just a basic architectural plan. It was a profound vision. She had painstakingly researched every single original blueprint, traced every piece of ancient hardware back to its original source, and aggressively created a structural restoration strategy so absolutely meticulous and flawless that our board had absolutely no choice but to fully fund the project. That brilliant architect was Elara Vance. Excited, shocked murmurs violently rippled through the massive crowd. My parents stood completely frozen in terror. For 18 grueling months, Elara physically worked on saving this building exactly as if it were her own child. Every single heavy oak door you walk through tonight, she painstakingly restored them entirely by hand. The magnificent chandeliers, the intricate crown molding, the massive glass windows, absolutely all of it was miraculously brought back from total ruin entirely because one stubborn woman absolutely refused to let history disappear. Eleanor reached into her elegant clutch and withdrew a heavy envelope. Cream cardstock, the official seal clearly visible through the thick paper. Tonight, she was unanimously nominated for our entire profession's absolute highest global honor. And I had genuinely hoped to proudly present this official letter to her in person tonight. But I have been sadly informed by her family that she is currently mentally unwell. Eleanor looked directly, piercingly at my mother, which is incredibly strange, because I actually spoke with her on the phone just yesterday afternoon and she sounded absolutely, perfectly fine to me. The heavy silence that followed that brutal statement was absolute and suffocating. 150 powerful people, federal judges, ruthless corporate executives, elite socialites, ancient, old money and aggressive new wealth stood inside a massive room completely full of my grueling work, staring directly at my parents, desperately waiting for a logical explanation that couldn't possibly exist. The very first damning question came from a wealthy woman draped in a black designer dress. Beatrice, is your daughter actually mentally unwell, or did you just maliciously choose not to invite her? My mother slowly opened her mouth, but quickly closed it again. Her perfectly manicured hands aggressively twisted around the fragile stem of her champagne flute. It is incredibly complicated. She finally managed to choke out. There are very complex family dynamics that. Family dynamics. The wealthy woman's tone was entirely flat and judgmental. You specifically told Cordelia that Elara possessed severe mental health problems. You explicitly told your country club friends that she completely couldn't function in society. But she just got globally nominated for the absolute highest architectural award on Earth. More angry, disgusted voices rapidly joined the interrogation. Not aggressively shouting. This specific crowd was entirely too well-bred for screaming matches. But their words were pointed, surgical, and incredibly precise. Beatrice explicitly mentioned her daughter simply works in dirty construction. Is that exactly what we are calling elite restoration architecture nowadays? I read the highly disturbing interview quote online. My voice was never, ever heard inside my family. That is quite a damning statement to publish. And then, Aunt Cordelia, standing near the back of the crowd, finally spoke up. Again. Beatrice, you specifically, tearfully told me that Elara had suffered a massive psychological breakdown. You explicitly stated that was the exact reason she physically couldn't attend tonight. I foolishly believed your lies. I even sent her a tragic sympathy message. My mother's flawless, aristocratic mask finally, catastrophically cracked into a million pieces. I didn't say. I absolutely never meant. She never tells us a single thing about her life. How on earth are we supposed to know? Know what exactly? Judge Montgomery aggressively stepped forward, his voice freezing cold. That your own biological daughter is apparently one of the absolute most talented, brilliant architects in the entire country? That she single-handedly restored the very historic building you arrogantly chose to host this party inside? He slowly, visibly shook his head in absolute disgust. Julian, you specifically told me earlier tonight that you were incredibly proud of your flawless family. It seems what you actually meant was that you are only proud of the specific parts of your family you can control. My father had absolutely no viable response to that statement. The intricate, toxic mythology my mother had spent a decade aggressively building had completely collapsed into dust in less than 90 seconds. And then a guest suddenly turned their attention to Serafina. It was a young, wealthy woman approximately her age, someone belonging to her elite country club social circle. I would later learn she was exactly the kind of toxic friend who knows all your darkest secrets simply because you foolishly told them to her yourself. Wait a minute, the young woman said slowly, dawn breaking over her face. Serafina, you explicitly told me that your sister was pathetically finding herself. You stated she never really successfully launched in life. That she was basically, how exactly did you cruelly phrase it? The family's ultimate embarrassment. Serafina's perfectly composed, beautiful face instantly went rigid with terror. That is absolutely not. I didn't mean it like, you explicitly said she possessed severe mental problems. That your parents completely refused to talk about her because it was entirely too painful for them. Another voice angrily joined the chorus. You literally told me she works at some pathetic, cheap handyman company. That she flunked out of college. I said she abruptly left her graduate program early. Serafina's voice violently rose in volume, incredibly defensive. That is technically factually true. She finished the program way ahead of schedule, but so. She finished the rigorous program early and then miraculously restored a $12 million historic landmark and got globally nominated for the absolute highest honor in the entire architectural world, the first woman. Aggressively crossed her arms over her chest. That is exactly what you call not launching in life? I could perfectly imagine Serafina standing there, draped in her expensive designer gown, her flawless hair perfectly coiffed, her entire fragile identity built solely upon being the successful daughter, violently watching her entire world crumble into ash. And then, Preston finally spoke up. Her wealthy, passive husband, the elite private equity banker, the man she had specifically married simply to complete the flawless, Instagram-perfect picture of ultimate success. Serafina. His voice was incredibly quiet, but in the sudden, deafening hush of the room, everyone heard his words perfectly. You explicitly told me your sister was deeply troubled, that she was the ultimate shame of this family. That is exactly why we never, ever see her at holidays. He looked directly at his wife with an expression I instantly recognized. It was the horrifying expression of a man slowly realizing he had been fed a carefully, maliciously edited version of his own reality for years. What else have you aggressively not been telling me the truth about? Serafina's pathetic excuses completely died on her lips. Some toxic lies can miraculously survive absolutely anything, except the blinding light of the truth. If you are currently sitting there thinking, how on earth could things possibly change this incredibly fast? I desperately want to tell you something very important. They didn't change fast at all. This explosive moment was 10 agonizing years in the meticulous making. 10 long years of suffocating silence. 10 years of patiently letting my grueling work pile up in the corner while everyone intentionally looked the other way. The absolute truth doesn't inherently require loud drama to finally come out. It simply needs enough time. Tell me in the comments below, have you ever experienced a monumental moment when absolutely everyone finally saw the massive empire you had been quietly building all along? Let us continue the story. After Serafina furiously hung up on me, I sat perfectly still in my dark apartment for a very long time. The evening light outside my window had slowly shifted to that specific, deep, bruising blue-gray that arrives right before total darkness. My cell phone had violently buzzed several more times. Frantic text messages from excited colleagues who had just seen the global announcement. A desperate voicemail from a prominent reporter at the local newspaper. But I completely ignored all of them. I was absolutely not ready to celebrate just yet. I slowly walked over to the window of my apartment. I couldn't really see much of anything. Just the dull brick back of another building. A tiny narrow slice of the street. The completely ordinary, mundane life of the city going about its quiet evening. But somewhere exactly 45 minutes away, an extravagant, multi-million-dollar party was violently falling apart at the seams. I thought deeply about what Eleanor had said on the phone the night before. If you suddenly find yourself free tomorrow evening, you absolutely know exactly where to find me. I thought about the massive, towering oak doors I had spent 3 agonizing months meticulously restoring, the glittering crystal chandeliers, the intricate, hand-painted historical wallpaper. Every single dark corner of that massive building held a massive piece of my undivided attention, my painstaking care, my absolute love. My toxic parents had cruelly told me I wasn't welcome there. But that historic building was entirely, undeniably mine in absolutely every single way that mattered. I slowly stood up, walked directly to my closet, and deliberately pulled out the dress I had been secretly saving for some massive, future occasion I could never quite predict. It was a stunning, midnight blue wrap dress. Incredibly simple, but flawlessly elegant. The exact kind of garment you wear when you desperately want to feel exactly like yourself, only infinitely more powerful. I strapped on The expensive designer watch I had proudly bought myself after successfully completing my very first major project. It had cost significantly more than I could actually afford at the time, but I had desperately wanted a physical object to mark the exact moment when I had finally proven to myself that I was undeniably brilliant at what I did. Absolutely no one in my biological family had ever laid eyes on it. I picked up my car keys. I was absolutely not driving over there to throw a screaming, dramatic tantrum. I wasn't going there to enact petty, malicious revenge. I was going because that building was mine and I inherently deserved to stand proudly inside it. The long drive took exactly 45 minutes. I intentionally took the dark, winding back roads, the ones that snake through the old, historic coastal towns, where the ancient trees arch over the wet pavement exactly like towering cathedral ceilings. I was absolutely not in a desperate hurry. I had patiently spent 10 long years waiting for this exact moment. Another hour wouldn't change the outcome. When I finally turned my car onto the estate's long gravel drive, my breath caught sharply in my throat. Blackwood Manor was spectacularly lit up, looking exactly like a beautiful memory suddenly brought vividly to life. Every single massive window glowed with warm light. Bright, white fairy lights meticulously wrapped the towering entrance columns. The expansive, historic gardens I had fiercely helped preserve were currently filled with elite guests, dressed in stunning evening wear, their dark silhouettes moving gracefully against the golden light violently spilling from inside the manor. I confidently parked my car at the very far end of the crowded lot and slowly began walking toward the grand entrance. The massive oak doors, my very own doors, were propped wide open, warmly welcoming the guests into the fully restored grand foyer. I paused for a long, heavy moment right at the threshold, gently running my fingertips along the ancient wood grain that I intimately knew by heart. 3 grueling months of manual labor, 2 heavy coats of hand-rubbed oil finish, extremely rare, replacement hardware meticulously sourced from an obscure specialty shop hidden deep in the mountains, which had been forced to special order the intricate hinges directly from Germany. I had proudly stood inside this specific doorway 100 times during the brutal restoration process, but absolutely never like this. Never wearing a stunning designer dress. Never with my heart violently pounding against my ribcage. Never confidently walking directly toward the toxic family that had cruelly told me to stay away. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The grand foyer massively opened up. Around me, the gleaming, polished marble floor, the meticulously restored crystal chandelier throwing fractured, prismatic light across the high, vaulted ceiling, the sweeping, grand staircase I had viciously fought developers to save, when absolutely everyone else desperately wanted to modernize and destroy it. Every single pristine surface held my invisible fingerprints, my agonizing decisions, my ultimate vision. And then, someone finally turned around and saw me. A wealthy woman standing near the mahogany bar. Then, a powerful man standing by the roaring fireplace. Then another. And another. That is her. A frantic, shocked whisper instantly carried across the massive room. That is Elara Vance. 150. Elite people instantly fell utterly, completely silent. And I stood proudly in the doorway of the historic building I had miraculously saved, finally, truly, ready to be seen by the world. My mother was standing completely frozen near the absolute center of the room. When she finally laid eyes on me, I calmly watched her face violently cycle through absolutely every single emotion she had spent decades meticulously suppressing in public. Pure shock, then rapid recognition, then absolute blinding fear, and then, briefly, something that looked terrifyingly close to genuine, crippling shame. The crystal champagne glass trembling in her hand, tilted at a highly dangerous angle. Her expensive designer gown suddenly looked significantly less like protective armor and significantly more like a pathetic Halloween costume. My father stood rigidly right beside her, his face carefully Totally blank, his signature, terrifying boardroom expression. I began walking very slowly toward them. I wasn't frantically rushing. I wasn't hesitating for a second. I was just walking with the exact, confident stride of someone who is finally arriving home. Eleanor caught my eye from completely across the room and offered me a very small, incredibly powerful nod of her head. It was absolute permission. It was encouragement. It was total support. I stopped a few feet away from my frozen parents, close enough to be perfectly heard, close enough for the wealthy guests hovering nearby to clearly hear every word too. Mom, Dad. My voice was incredibly steady, significantly quieter and calmer than I had expected. I successfully received your vicious text message. No, I wasn't formally invited to this party. My mother slowly opened her mouth, but absolutely nothing came out. But this historic building was my personal project, I continued relentlessly. 18 grueling months of my entire life. Every single heavy door you walk through tonight, every single massive window, every intricate piece of crown molding you have been arrogantly showing off to your guests tonight. I personally designed the entire restoration. I aggressively supervised every single contractor. I was physically standing here, long before sunrise and long after sunset for a year and a half, ensuring this place would proudly stand for another century. My father finally managed to speak. Elara, this is absolutely not the appropriate time or place for what exactly, Dad? For existing? For finally being incredibly good at something? I wasn't burning with rage. That is the truly strange, beautiful part of the story. I had fully expected to feel blinding, explosive anger. I had absolutely earned the right to feel it. But standing there in that opulent room, I just felt incredibly crystal clear. I am absolutely not here to maliciously ruin your precious party, I stated calmly. I am standing here because this specific place deeply matters to my soul. Even if my existence doesn't seem to matter to you. The heavy silence that followed that statement was undeniably the loudest, most deafening sound I had ever heard in my entire life. My mother recovered her composure first. She literally always does. Elara, sweetie. The fake endearment sounded incredibly foreign and toxic in her mouth. Sticky, forced. Highly unpracticed. Of course, we desperately wanted you here tonight. We genuinely thought you would be infinitely more comfortable resting at home. You intimately know exactly how overwhelming these massive social events can be for your mind. Overwhelming? I repeated the specific word incredibly slowly, allowing its hollow, manipulative cruelty to echo in the silence. You explicitly told Aunt Cordelia that I possessed severe, debilitating mental health issues. You actively told your elite book club that I completely couldn't function in society. You deliberately told people I was a dirty construction worker. A few loud gasps erupted from the surrounding wealthy guests. Someone's cell phone was definitely actively recording the confrontation. I could clearly see the subtle, glowing angle of a digital screen out of the corner of my eye. But I absolutely did not care. My father aggressively stepped forward, his voice completely dropping to that low, terrifying register he exclusively uses when he is desperately trying to re-establish total control. This is absolutely not the time or the place for dramatic family meltdowns, Elara. You are profoundly embarrassing yourself in front of everyone. No, Dad, I calmly held his freezing gaze. I am profoundly embarrassing you. There is a massive, fundamental difference between the two. Serafina suddenly appeared at my mother's side, her perfectly contoured face flushed dark red with pure anger and far too much champagne. You literally always have to make absolutely everything about yourself, don't you? This is Mom and Dad's sacred anniversary. This is their special night. And you just had to maliciously show up and ruin it. And I absolutely did not force the Global Architectural Committee to release their announcement tonight. I shot back calmly. I absolutely did not force the magazines to publish their sprawling, Feature articles tonight. I didn't even know this lavish party existed until exactly 3 weeks ago when you all specifically texted me and ordered me not to come. Judge Montgomery's booming voice suddenly cut through the tension from somewhere to my left. Actually, I strongly believe the real drama officially started when you arrogantly invited all your elite guests to a historic building your own flesh and blood daughter painstakingly restored and then explicitly told everyone she was far too mentally unwell to attend. My mother's face completely crumpled in terror for just a single, fleeting second. Just long enough for absolutely everyone in the room to witness it. We didn't. I absolutely never meant. She was frantically stammering now. The highly polished, untouchable socialite was completely gone, rapidly replaced by a desperate, pathetic woman who had finally totally run out of manipulative narratives to hide behind. But I was entirely done listening to her pathetic explanations. Eleanor Sterling confidently stepped forward from the crowd. She moved effortlessly through the dense throng of guests with the quiet, terrifying authority of someone who has spent her entire life fiercely protecting things that actually matter. When she finally reached my side, she gently placed a warm hand briefly on my shoulder. It was a gesture so incredibly simple yet so profound, it almost completely broke my composure. Since Elara is currently standing here with us, Eleanor announced, her powerful voice carrying effortlessly to every single dark corner of the massive room. I would very much like to publicly share something I had originally planned to announce regardless of tonight's chaotic developments. The entire room went completely, utterly still. The National Heritage Trust has officially, formally approved a brand new, massive state grant in the staggering amount of $750,000. It is entirely dedicated to the full restoration of the historic state capitol rotunda. It is undeniably one of the most culturally significant, massive preservation projects we have undertaken in an entire decade. She paused dramatically, letting the massive dollar amount fully sink into the minds of the greedy crowd. And we have unanimously, proudly selected Elara Vance to lead the entire project as our principal architect. For a very long, suspended moment, absolutely no one in the room moved a single muscle. Then, the applause slowly began. It was incredibly scattered at first, but it rapidly built in volume, rolling powerfully through the massive room. Exactly like a tidal wave. It was real, genuine, thunderous applause from powerful people who had absolutely no stake in my family's toxic dysfunction. People who simply, purely recognized true excellence when they witnessed it. Eleanor slowly reached into her elegant clutch and withdrew a heavy sealed envelope. The official, binding grant letter. The National Trust seal heavily embossed in shiny gold. "This belongs entirely to you," she said softly, firmly, pressing the heavy envelope into my hands. "You have absolutely earned this. Not because of who your powerful family is, but entirely in spite of exactly how they have horribly treated you." I slowly looked down at the heavy envelope. I physically felt its immense weight. I deeply understood exactly what it represented. It wasn't just about the massive influx of money. It wasn't just about securing the project of a lifetime. It was the absolute, documented, official proof that I was exactly who I had always fiercely believed myself to be. Directly behind me, I could physically feel my parents' burning eyes, my mother's terrified silence, my father's rigid, furious posture, Serafina's barely contained, jealous fury. But for the very first time in my entire 32 years on Earth, their toxic opinions absolutely did not matter to me. The entire room was loudly applauding, and they were all applauding exclusively for me. What exactly happened next was almost entirely too perfect to believe. While I stood proudly holding the grant letter, still mentally processing the magnitude of what had just occurred, the elite guests began to rapidly approach me. Not my parents, not Serafina, me. Expensive business cards magically appeared in my hands. Enthusiastic, Genuine congratulations were profusely offered. Real, authentic professional interest from powerful people who had spent their entire evening foolishly thinking they were attending a simple, boring anniversary party and now found themselves witnessing something infinitely more profound and interesting. My mother stood completely alone by the roaring fireplace. The wealthy women from her elite book club, the exact same women who had previously sent her pathetic sympathy messages about her deeply troubled, crazy daughter, were now actively, carefully avoiding making any eye contact with her. I quietly watched one of them fiercely whisper something to another. Both of them briefly glanced at my mother with expressions that had drastically shifted from respectful deference to something much closer to profound pity or perhaps deep, unfiltered judgment. My father desperately attempted to magically salvage what little respect he could. I watched him aggressively approach Judge Montgomery, his hand confidently extended for a firm shake that absolutely never came. "Julian," the judge said incredibly coolly, looking him up and down in disgust, "I strongly believe you, and I need to seriously reconsider that lucrative golf invitation we discussed earlier. I vastly prefer to spend my valuable leisure time exclusively with people who actually possess their priorities in order." He turned his back and walked away without waiting for Arthur's response. Serafina was standing rigidly near the mahogany bar, her phone tightly clutched in her hand. She was probably frantically composing damage control social media stories that would absolutely never quite manage to repair her shattered reputation. But it was Preston's face that truly caught my attention. Her wealthy husband was intensely watching her with the horrifying expression of a man who was rapidly, violently rearranging absolutely everything he thought he knew about his life. I would learn much later that Preston had aggressively started asking very difficult questions about exactly what else Serafina had lied to him about what other elaborate, toxic stories she had maliciously constructed. Their entire relationship foundation, so incredibly carefully built, entirely on fake image and assumption, had developed a massive, irreparable crack that simply couldn't be plastered over. And Aunt Cordelia finally found me in the dense crowd. "Elara." Her voice was incredibly small and fragile. "I am so incredibly, deeply sorry. I honestly didn't know the truth. Your mother explicitly told me things that were completely, utterly untrue. I absolutely should have possessed the decency to ask you directly." I simply nodded my head. What else was there possibly left to say? Right before I finally left the party, I specifically asked my parents for a brief moment of their time. I absolutely did not ask to speak privately. There was absolutely no point in seeking privacy anymore. We stood off to the side of the grand foyer, right near the massively restored bay window that I had personally spent 2 agonizing weeks repairing by hand. A few curious guests openly lingered within earshot. I absolutely did not care. My mother's face was violently blotchy and red beneath her expensive, smeared makeup. My father's heavy jaw was clenched so incredibly tight I could visibly see the muscle violently jumping under his skin. Serafina had completely drifted away into the shadows. Whether she fled from sheer shame or pure self-preservation, I honestly couldn't tell. "I am absolutely not asking either of you to apologize to me tonight," I stated, my voice incredibly calm, significantly calmer than I felt inside. "I am not even asking you to fully understand exactly what you did wrong." My mother desperately started to open her mouth to speak, but I firmly held up a hand to stop her. I spent 10 long, agonizing years desperately trying to explain my inherent worth to you. 10 years foolishly hoping that if I just worked incredibly hard, if I achieved massive things, you would finally, truly see me. But you never ever did. You never actually wanted to see me. My father exhaled sharply, a sound of pure frustration. "Elara, this is hardly the appropriate time for this. You are entirely right," I cut him off smoothly. "It is not the time. The appropriate time was exactly 10 years ago when you maliciously cropped my body out of the family photos. The time was every single holiday dinner I wasn't invited to attend. The time was exactly 3 weeks ago, when you viciously texted me that my presence would embarrass you in front of your important guests. I looked at both of them. I really, truly looked at them. The exact way you look at a heavy object you are finally ready to permanently release from your grip. I am completely, utterly done explaining myself. From this exact moment forward, you can finally reach out to me when you are genuinely ready to see me for exactly who I actually am. And absolutely not a single second before. My mother's eyes were swimming with tears. Elara, please, not tonight. Mom. I took a deliberate step backward. I have finally said absolutely everything I needed to say. I confidently turned around and walked out through the towering oak doors I had painstakingly restored. And for the very first time in my entire existence, leaving my biological family absolutely didn't feel like I was running away in terror. It felt exactly like I was powerfully walking toward something beautiful. I learned the dark details about Serafina's collapsing situation in fractured pieces over the chaotic weeks that followed. Aunt Cordelia surprisingly became my unexpected, highly reliable source of inside information. Apparently, discovering you have been aggressively lied to about your niece's mental stability creates a very specific, powerful kind of family solidarity. She called my phone exactly a week after the disastrous party, her voice incredibly careful. I strongly thought you should know, she whispered. Serafina and Preston, they're officially engaging in a trial separation. I was standing in my small kitchen, my morning coffee rapidly growing cold between my hands. Because of exactly what happened at the party? That was the initial explosive catalyst, yes. But apparently, Preston started aggressively asking very difficult questions immediately afterward. Questions about other massive things Serafina had explicitly told him. About her fake charity work. About her hidden finances, about, well, absolutely everything. I thought deeply about my sister's highly curated social media feed. The fake, filtered photographs. The utterly fabricated, perfect life. The entire image she had, meticulously constructed for decades. A fragile house of cards. He finally realized she had been aggressively editing the absolute truth for years. Aunt Cordelia continued, her tone grim. Not just about you. About absolutely everything. I honestly didn't feel deeply satisfied hearing this dark news. I didn't feel a soaring sense of vindication. I just felt incredibly tired. I felt profoundly sad, perhaps mourning the loving sister I might have actually had if she hadn't spent her entire life desperately trying to be the only sibling worth seeing. A few days later, Serafina sent me a vicious text message. For simple, venomous words, you ruined my life. I stared at the glowing screen for a very long time. Then I permanently deleted the message entirely without responding. I absolutely did not ruin her life. I simply stopped allowing myself to be the convenient, invisible explanation for her own profound unhappiness. Without a convenient scapegoat, without a deeply troubled sister to constantly point a finger at, all her meticulously constructed, toxic stories had absolutely nothing left to hide behind. The unvarnished truth absolutely does not ruin anyone. It simply violently reveals exactly what was already rotting therein. The dark. And sometimes, what is rotting there isn't pretty. Exactly 3 months after the explosive party, I unexpectedly received a brief text message from my father. I almost instantly deleted it completely unread. We absolutely hadn't spoken a single syllable since that fateful night. Not a single word, not a brief email. Nothing. I had been incredibly, profoundly at peace with that absolute silence. I had finally learned that some broken relationships are simply not meant to be repaired. They're meant to be permanently released. But something deep inside my gut made me open the message. Elara, I have been thinking. I would very much like to come see the State Capitol Rotunda project when it is finally completed. if you were okay with that. Dad. I read the short text 3 entire times. It was absolutely not an apology. It was not a grand acknowledgement of absolutely everything that had happened. It completely ignored the agonizing years of dismissal, the toxic lies, and the vicious text message explicitly telling me I would embarrass them. It was simply just an ask. A very small, incredibly fragile door slowly cracking open in the dark. I absolutely did not respond right away. I let the message sit there for an entire week, obsessively turning it over in my mind exactly like a smooth stone I had found on a beach. Then I finally wrote back, okay. When the project is fully completed, I will let you know. It was absolutely not forgiveness. Not yet. And maybe it won't ever be. I honestly haven't decided yet. But it was a fragile possibility. A microscopic chance for something entirely different if he was actually willing to do the grueling, agonizing work required to earn it. My mother hasn't attempted to contact me at all. According to Aunt Cordelia, she remains deeply entrenched in absolute denial. She is still desperately telling anyone who will listen that the party incident was just a massive, unfortunate misunderstanding. Still, aggressively insisting she has done absolutely nothing wrong. Some highly toxic people simply cannot admit their catastrophic mistakes without their entire fragile identity violently collapsing. I honestly don't know if she will ever be truly ready. And I am absolutely not waiting around in the dark to find out. What I have intimately learned is this. True forgiveness is absolutely not about whether they actually deserve it. It is entirely about me refusing to carry their heavy, suffocating weight around anymore. But extending forgiveness absolutely does not mean magically forgetting the past. And it definitively does not mean violently going back to the exact way things were before. Some doors can eventually be cautiously opened again. Other doors must remain permanently, securely locked for a very good reason. I am currently standing physically outside the massive state capitol building. Right now, it is a bleak, gray morning in late winter. The exact kind of biting cold that makes your exhaled breath highly visible and your fingers incredibly stiff. The massive, historic building rises majestically in front of me. 3 towering stories of flawless federal architecture. Ancient brick and heavy limestone. Massive glass windows that have silently watched over the sprawling city for 200 years. It desperately needs massive amounts of work. A staggering amount of work. The ancient foundation possesses deep, dangerous cracks. The sprawling roof desperately needs total replacing. There is severe water damage located in the east wing that will take grueling months to properly address. I absolutely cannot wait to get started. I quietly think about the terrified girl I was exactly 10 years ago. The one awkwardly standing at the very edge of her sister's lavish wedding photo wearing a cheap, second-hand dress, desperately wondering why she never, ever quite fit into the puzzle. That deeply broken girl spent so incredibly long desperately waiting for permission, waiting for her toxic family to finally see her, waiting for someone, anyone, to magically confirm that she was actually worth something in this world. I absolutely do not wait anymore. The heavy, custom-forged gold timepiece resting on my wrist brilliantly catches the morning light. I proudly bought it myself with massive amounts of money I earned for brilliant work I executed flawlessly. Absolutely no one in my biological family handed it to me. Absolutely no one in my biological family even comprehends its true value. But I intimately do. A prominent reporter from the major city newspaper called my office yesterday, desperately wanting to do a massive follow-up interview. Ms. Vance, she asked eagerly, what exact advice would you possibly give to young, aspiring architects who are just starting out in the industry? I thought incredibly deeply about her question for a long time. Build something that permanently lasts, I finally replied softly. And absolutely do not ever wait for permission to exist from people who never, ever plan to give it to you. She furiously wrote the quote down. I honestly wonder if she truly understood. Exactly what I meant by it. I spent 10 agonizing years desperately trying to prove myself to toxic people who absolutely did not want any proof. They desperately wanted me to remain small, to stay completely invisible, to quietly remain trapped in the suffocating box they had meticulously built for my life. But ancient buildings are absolutely not the only things on this earth that can be beautifully restored. Sometimes, the absolute most important, monumental renovation you will ever undertake is the one you violently execute on yourself. So, that is my entire story. There are absolutely no magical, hidden wills. No secret, unexpected inheritances. No dramatic courtroom reveals. Just 10 grueling years of silent, exhausting work. A few highly official, undeniable documents. And the incredibly slow, patient, undeniable accumulation of the absolute truth. My parents aggressively texted me exactly 3 weeks before their lavish party and explicitly told me not to show my face. They arrogantly said only high society guests were invited. They maliciously said I would humiliate them. And then, the international news anchor proudly said my name out loud on the exact same night they were desperately trying to erase my existence. I honestly do not know if that is pure karma or simply a beautiful coincidence. I do not know if the universe actively arranges these moments or if we simply notice the patterns that perfectly fit the stories we desperately need to tell to survive. What I do absolutely know with total certainty is this: I permanently stopped waiting for my toxic family to finally see me. And somehow, miraculously, that is the exact moment when absolutely everyone else in the world finally did. If you are currently listening to this narrative and you are actively suffering in the middle of your own 10-year journey, if you are aggressively working in total silence, quietly building your empire in the dark, desperately waiting for someone to finally notice what you have miraculously created, I desperately want you to hear these words. Keep going. The highly toxic people who currently dismiss your existence might absolutely never, ever change. Your biological family might never, ever understand your brilliance. The massive recognition you inherently deserve might arrive incredibly late, or perhaps not at all, or in bizarre ways you absolutely never expected. But your inherent worth as a human being is absolutely not determined by whether they possess the capacity to see it. Your immense worth is entirely determined by you. Build something that profoundly matters in this world. Let your brilliant work do all the screaming for you. And when the time finally arrives, when the heavy doors inevitably blast open, walk through them with your head held incredibly high. You absolutely do not need anyone's permission or invitation to stand proudly in the rooms you have built with your own hands. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this long journey. If this story resonated deeply within your soul, please drop a comment below. I genuinely read every single one. And if you desperately want to hear more empowering stories exactly like this, there is another powerful narrative waiting for you in the description box below. Until we meet again.